You know how sometimes you forget you even own something? Like that juicer you swore would change your life, or the gym membership that silently bleeds your bank account every month. Yeah, well, for me, it was a lake cabin. Technically, it was my grandfather's. He built it back in the 60s with nothing but raw pine, calloused hands, and what I can only assume was an unhealthy love for isolation. The man believed in two things: black coffee and being left the hell alone. When he passed, the cabin went to my dad. When Dad retired to Florida and decided golf was his new god, it became mine. Unofficially, then officially. I'd been there maybe 3 times in the last 6 years. Maybe. No electricity, no internet, just a dock, a couple of chairs, and whatever wildlife decided to bless or threaten your visit. A perfect getaway if you're a raccoon or someone who thinks mosquito bites are a form of therapy. For me, it was more like a distant artifact from a life I never lived. But then, one fine Wednesday, as I was contemplating the philosophical implications of reheating pizza for the 3rd time that week, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, a letter. On HOA letterhead, no less, which always smells like entitlement and barely concealed rage. I opened it with the same enthusiasm I reserve for jury duty notices and dental appointment reminders. Dear property owner, it has come to our attention that the structure at Parcel 17B, known colloquially as the Lakeside Cabin, is in violation of community development protocols as established under Section 14, Article 9. Due to ongoing concerns regarding aesthetic standards and non-conforming usage, you are hereby given 48 hours to initiate proceedings to vacate and list the property for sale. Failure to comply may result in legal escalation. Marlene Wexler, HOA Chairwoman. Ah yes, Marlene. A woman whose existence I had managed to avoid until this very moment. Her signature was a full 3 inches wide, slanted like she was auditioning for a villain in cursive. You could practically hear the pearls clutched as she wrote it. I blinked, then laughed, then read it again. 48 hours to sell my grandfather's cabin? You've got to admire the confidence. I hadn't even visited in months, but apparently, it had now become such a blight on society that it needed to be purged immediately. The audacity was so strong. I swear the envelope smelled faintly of Chardonnay and condescension. Out of sheer curiosity and a growing sense of what the hell is going on, I called the number at the bottom of the letter. A very perky voice answered. Pleasant Shores Lakeside Association. This is Claire. I cleared my throat. Hi, Claire. Yeah, I just got a letter from Marlene Wexler telling me I have 48 hours to sell my cabin. Oh, Parcel 17B. Her tone shifted faster than a cat hearing a vacuum cleaner. Yes, Ms. Wexler has been very active on that case. Case? What exactly is the issue here? Well, technically, your cabin is considered non-compliant with updated shoreline aesthetics. There have been several complaints about its appearance and lack of landscaping, and it's not currently registered with any HOA-approved rental management program. I'm not renting it. I barely even go there. Well, that's part of the problem, she said, as if I'd confessed to a felony. Unoccupied properties tend to attract undesirables. Undesirables, I repeated. You mean squirrels? Claire didn't laugh. Instead, she chirped. You'll need to speak directly with Ms. Wexler if you'd like to appeal the notice. Oh, I would. Not because I expected a rational conversation, but because I needed to see this circus for myself. So, the next day, I drove up to the lake. Now, for context, the cabin isn't in a gated community. It's on a quiet bend of the lake, surrounded by maybe 6 other homes, mostly used in summer. The HOA hadn't even existed back when my grandfather was alive. It was stitched together a few years ago by a few overly ambitious part-timers with a deep love for bylaws and a deeper hatred for anything unapproved. As I pulled into the dirt road leading to the cabin, something new caught my eye. A wooden sign. Welcome to Pleasant Shores, private HOA property. No trespassing without authorization. It was bolted to a fresh post on what I knew was part of my land. Interesting. I parked by the cabin and stepped out. The place looked the same as ever, a little weathered, sure, but far from abandoned. The deck needed restaining. The windows could use a wash. But it had that rustic, I'm not trying to impress anyone charm. Like your grandpa's flannel shirt. Worn, but solid. But a few things had definitely changed. A row of trash cans, not mine, was stacked against the north side of the cabin. There was a gravel path now leading across the backlit toward the lake, where I spotted what looked like a communal kayak rack. And, cherry on top, a mounted bench labeled, Property of Pleasant Shores HOA, members only. I pulled out my phone, opened the land plot survey, and smiled. Because you know what's better than sarcasm? Receipts. See, here's the fun part they must have forgotten. My grandfather didn't just build the cabin, he bought a generous chunk of land around it. And while I hadn't paid much attention to the finer details when it transferred to me, I remembered enough to know this. That entire back lot, the gravel path, the trash can zone, the kayak rack and bench, still my land. In fact, Pleasant Shores HOA had set up shop on my dirt like it was a free Costco sample station. Oh, Marlene, you sweet, clipboard-hugging tyrant. You came into my house, left a threatening letter, and built a kingdom on my porch. I stood there, listening to the sound of birds chirping, water lapping gently on the dock, and the distant hum of HOA members planning their next petty coup, and made a decision. If they wanted to play this game, I'd be happy to oblige. But I don't play fair. I drove back to the city that afternoon with a mental to-do list and the kind of smirk that only comes when you realize your enemies are dumb and overconfident. Dangerous combo. First stop? The county clerk's office. I needed copies of the original property plat and recent zoning maps. The guy behind the desk handed them over like he was passing me the blueprints to a nuclear warhead, which, in a way, he was. Because on that map, in bright, bold lines, was the proof. The HOA's communal area, garbage station, lake path, and their prized kayak rack. 100% on land I owned. I also dug up something even better. A little clause in the local municipal code that allowed for rental of private property to commercial or nonprofit groups, provided the usage had been unauthorized for over 30 days and no formal rental agreement had been signed. They'd been squatting for longer than that, way longer. Translation: they'd opened the door for me to charge them rent. Retroactively. But I wasn't going to go in guns blazing yet. No. This needed flair, timing, and just a touch of that unhinged creativity my friends tend to call concerning but impressive. So I called Claire. Pleasant Shores HOA, this is Claire. Hi Claire, it's the owner of Parcel 17B again. I just had a few follow-up questions about the notice I received. Oh, of course, she said, chipper as ever. Ms. Wexler actually wanted to meet with you in person. She's available tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the HOA clubhouse. Perfect, I said, casually chewing on a pen. I'll bring paperwork. She didn't ask what kind. The HOA clubhouse was about as subtle as a yacht in a duck pond. It sat on the far side of the lake, freshly painted siding, fake flowers in sad plastic pots, and a parking lot that screamed, "We hold meetings about flagpole heights here." I arrived at 1:59 p.m., not out of respect, but to assert punctual dominance. Inside, I was met with a vision straight out of suburban folklore. 3 board members sat at a long folding table. Marlene, front and center, looked like she had eaten a lemon and hadn't stopped tasting it since the 90s. Her white blouse was buttoned to the collar. Her name tag sparkled, and her posture had the rigidity of someone who thought nodding was a sign of weakness. "Ms. Bennett," she said, folding her hands like she was preparing to exorcise me. "Thank you for coming." "It's Mrs. actually," I said cheerfully. "But let's not waste any of our valuable time." Her eyes flicked, but she pushed on. "As you've been informed, your structure is in violation of our community standards. We've received multiple complaints about its condition and lack of modern features. It also does not meet the HOA's aesthetic guidelines." "You mean the guidelines that didn't exist when the cabin was built?" "That's irrelevant now," she snapped. "All structures within HOA territory must comply with current policy." I smiled. "About that." I pulled out the survey map and laid it gently across the table. 3 sets of eyes moved in unison like vultures spotting a wounded rabbit. "This," I said, tapping the area in question, "is my land. All of it, including the gravel trail, the trash bins, the kayak rack, and yes, the bench. Marlene squinted. This must be a mistake. That area is maintained by the HOA. Exactly, I said. Maintained by you. Used by you. Built on my land. I let it sit there. A solid, savory pause. Claire's lips parted slightly. The man to Marlene's right, Greg maybe, blinked like he'd just remembered he left the stove on. Marlene, to her credit, stayed silent for a full 5 seconds. That must have been a personal record. That land has been in common use for over 2 years, she finally said, but her voice had lost a layer of smug. And nobody objected. Well, I'm objecting now, I said sweetly. And under Local Code 44.19b, I'm well within my rights to issue a retroactive rental agreement for any unauthorized use of private property by a third party. Her eyebrows lifted. You want rent? I'm being generous, I said, flipping another paper over. I calculated the market value for commercial lakefront use, applied it to the square footage you've occupied, factored in utilities and communal access, and triple-weighted it for lack of authorization. Greg or Gary or somebody choked softly. Marlene's voice sharpened. That is completely legal? Yeah, it is. I had a lawyer confirm it this morning. Don't worry, you'll get the invoice. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and leaned in just enough to enjoy the citrusy tang of her indignation. You gave me 48 hours to sell my family's cabin, I said quietly. So I'm giving you 48 hours to clear your stuff off my property or sign the lease. Then I walked out. Back at the cabin, I sipped a beer on the deck as the sun dipped behind the trees. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about drawing a line. My grandfather didn't build this place to win any beauty contests. He built it to exist. Quietly. Stubbornly. Like he did. And Marlene and her band of khaki crusaders had just tried to bulldoze that history because it didn't match their Pinterest board. So no, I wasn't going to sell. I was going to restore it. Repaint it in exactly the same color. Leave the moss on the stones, the creaks in the floor, and every inch of personality that made it offend their sensibilities. And if they wanted to keep using my land, they'd better bring their checkbook. By the next morning, I'd emailed the invoice to the HOA's official address with the subject line, Rental Agreement, Unauthorized Use of Private Property, You're Welcome. I attached the property survey, legal references, and a delightfully aggressive PDF titled HOA Trespass Rent Schedule, 2020, present. No response. So I printed it all, in color, and mailed a hard copy certified. I also stapled a second copy to the kayak rack with a plastic sleeve labeled Legal Notice, just in case Marlene felt like taking her usual power stroll and needed a little light reading. Now, some people would have stopped there, sent the invoice, waited for the HOA to squirm. But me? I was just getting warmed up. See, I happen to work in digital marketing. Mostly boring stuff, SEO, ads, corporate rebranding for companies trying to look less evil. But that skill set becomes very useful when you need to burn someone down with the full power of Google search results and community forums. So I made a website, save17b.com, complete with drone shots of the cabin, a history of the land, and an open letter titled, My grandfather built this cabin in 1963. Now the HOA wants to bulldoze it. I uploaded pictures of the cabin's modest charm, emphasized how they'd literally built trash bins on my property, and explained the rent invoice in plain, bullet-pointed detail. Then I posted the link in local Facebook groups, Nextdoor threads, and even a subreddit dedicated to HOA horror stories. You'd be amazed how supportive the internet gets when the words unauthorized HOA trash bins show up. Within 48 hours, I had 312 comments, 67 private messages, 9 former HOA members offering interesting backstories on Marlene. One message from a man named Jim that just said, that woman poisoned my rose bushes in '04. Burn it all down. Jim got a heart react. By the end of the week, things got weird. I arrived at the cabin one morning to find the kayak rack gone. No note. No explanation. Just a patch of flattened grass and one lonely bungee cord flapping in the breeze. The HOA bench. Disassembled. The gravel path? Half dug up. awkwardly rerouted around the edge of my property like they were trying to pretend it had never been there. Someone, likely Greg, the human doormat, had moved the trash bins about 5 feet closer to the street, which still put them on the edge of my land. But hey, baby steps. I didn't even have to say a word. The passive-aggressive cleanup was already underway, but they still hadn't paid, or responded, or even acknowledged the invoice, which meant I had more work to do. So I went to the next HOA meeting. Yup, in person, full nuclear option. I wore a navy blazer, sensible boots, and a shirt that said, "Ask me about my land rights." Yes, I had it custom printed. And yes, I made two. One for laundry day. The meeting was held, as usual, in the Pleasant Shores clubhouse. The agenda, posted on the HOA's public board, listed riveting items like dog leash compliance, mailbox paint uniformity, and review of community signage regulations. But when I entered, all eyes shifted. The room fell quiet. The tension? Chef's kiss. I took a seat in the second row and waited until Marlene had to acknowledge my presence. She tried to avoid it. Tried so hard. You could see the panic hiding behind her artificially cheerful smile as she bumbled through line items with increasing speed. Then came Item 7, Private Property Boundary Concerns Regarding Parcel 17B. A beat of silence. Then I stood, calm, collected, holding a manila folder with enough documentation to paper the moon. "Hello," I said. "I'm the owner of Parcel 17B, the so-called non-compliant cabin the board tried to strong-arm into a sale. I'd like to clarify a few things about your accidental occupation of my property." A few older residents murmured. Marlene tightened her lips into a hyphen and said, "This isn't the appropriate forum for legal." "Actually," I said, smiling sweetly, "it is. Since your communal amenities were illegally installed on my land, and since the board has failed to respond to my legal notice, I'm formally announcing that as of next week, rent will be increasing by 25% for each week of non-payment." Claire, sitting in the corner, dropped her pen. Gasps. One lady said, "Wait, we have to pay rent." I turned to her. "Only if the HOA keeps squatting on my property. If they remove all structures and stop trespassing, no fees. I'm reasonable like that." Marlene tried to wrest back control. "This is an internal matter." "No," I said, raising my voice just enough to slice through her smug. "It's a legal matter. And the county zoning office, real estate assessor, and local news have copies of everything." That last part wasn't entirely true yet. The room went full buzz. Someone actually clapped. Marlene adjourned the meeting early, red-faced and shaking slightly, but I stayed and handed out a few simplified maps to interested homeowners. One guy looked it over and muttered, "Wait, does this mean my kayak's been on her land the whole time?" I smiled. "Yep, and it's adorable." I drove back that night, a thermos of coffee in hand, watching as the sky turned purple over the trees. And there it was, that same stubborn little cabin, sitting right where it always had. Unbothered. Unchanged. Mine. But now it was also known. Public. I wasn't hiding anymore. And neither was the fact that Marlene and her clipboard gang had built their little HOA empire halfway on land they didn't own. And next? Oh, I had plans. Because when a petty tyrant gets embarrassed in public, they don't fold, they fight. And Marlene? She was about to get desperate, which is exactly what I wanted. I thought the HOA would retreat, lick their wounds, maybe send a fruit basket and an awkward apology. But no, that's not how Karens of the high table operate. Instead, they doubled down. It started small, the kind of petty nonsense that only happens when you mix too much free time with too much passive aggression. The next week, I found a violation notice zip-tied to my dock. Unapproved dock structure does not meet HOA safety standards. Failure to comply may result in removal at owner's expense. Neat trick, considering I'm not in their HOA. My property predates it, was never enrolled, and I had never signed a damn thing. But they printed it on official letterhead and everything. Very professional. Very stupid. I crumpled it up, tossed it in the fire pit, and wrote a new notice of my own. Attempting to enforce HOA regulations on non-member land is considered harassment under civil code. Further attempts will result in formal legal action. Also, your font choice is offensive. Stapled it right to their mailbox. Next came the anonymous complaints. Suddenly, I was receiving calls from the county claiming they'd received reports of improper sewage disposal, abandoned vehicles, unsafe building materials. One woman at the county office whispered, "Honestly, this sounds like HOA nonsense. You're not even on their roster. We'll flag it." Then came the landscaping. One morning, I woke up at the cabin to find 3 men with leaf blowers on my lot, trimming overgrowth near the property line. I stepped outside in sweatpants, holding coffee like a weaponized ceramic threat. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One of them flinched. We're contracted by the HOA. Got a request to clean up this area." "Did that request include trespassing?" He blinked. I pulled out my phone, started recording. "You've got 5 seconds to explain how you got on my land without permission, or I'm calling the sheriff." They left faster than a middle schooler hearing the phrase, "pop quiz." I sent Marlene an email that night. Subject: Stop sending minions. If you want to escalate this, do it with a lawyer, not leaf blowers. She didn't respond. But her silence had weight, the kind of angry quiet you get before a thunderstorm or a lawsuit. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, it came. A packet, hand-delivered by some poor guy in khakis who looked like he'd rather be doing literally anything else. Marlene had filed a cease and desist. The claim? That I was obstructing community operations, damaging HOA infrastructure, and unlawfully charging fees to a nonprofit organization. Nonprofit. That was rich. HOA dues in Pleasant Shores were higher than most people's car payments. The cease and desist demanded I remove the invoice. Stop claiming ownership over shared recreational spaces. Cease defamatory online activity. Take down save17b.com. It also cited several HOA bylaws, which, again, I wasn't subject to. I showed the packet to my lawyer, a friend from college who now specialized in property law and lived for moments like this. He took one look, laughed for a full 15 seconds, and said, "This thing has more holes than a slice of Swiss cheese in a woodpecker sanctuary." We drafted a response, not just to reject the cease and desist, but to escalate things further. Formal notice of trespass and rent demand, round 2. This time, with calculated damages, interest, and a warning. If payment or removal wasn't made within 14 days, I'd begin legal proceedings. Oh, and I was also filing for a zoning reassessment of their structures, which might trigger a few permits they forgot to apply for. I sent it. Then I waited. And while I waited, something beautiful happened. The neighbors started turning. See, the HOA had kept its power through illusion. People thought they had to comply, that they had no choice. That Marlene was this all-knowing figurehead of suburban justice. But after my public speech, after the website, after the trash bins vanished in the night, people started asking questions. And Marlene? She did not like questions. I got texts. "Hey, are they allowed to raise dues without a vote? Do you know if they can really demand repainting every 5 years? Someone said the HOA trailer is technically on your land. Is that true?" Oh, it was true. I hadn't even brought that up yet. Then someone, not me, I swear, leaked a photo of the cease and desist letter onto a local Facebook group. The comments were savage. They want her to stop owning her land? What is this, feudalism? Who let Marlene cosplay as the Queen of England? One woman posted a side-by-side of Marlene's signature and a villain from a soap opera. 200 likes. Every day, the tension thickened. I'd go to the cabin, sip coffee, and watch HOA members speed walk past with forced smiles and twitchy little glances toward the gravel. The land war had gone psychological. And the best part? I still hadn't actually sued them. Yet. Then I got a call. From the local newspaper. Apparently someone, again, not me, probably Jim from the Roses, had tipped them off about the HOA trying to evict woman from her own land story. The reporter was polite, direct, and deeply amused. He asked for a statement. I gave him one. All I want is to be left alone. I didn't ask for a war, but if they want one, I charge rent. He laughed. I didn't. The story went live the next day. Landowner battles, HOA over cabin property. Charges rent for squatting. It blew up. The online comments were glorious. People offered to help pay legal fees. One guy said he'd write protest songs. Someone else suggested we host a lakefront barbecue with banners that said Marlene Free Zone. And just like that, the tide turned. The HOA board? Imploding. The members? Angry. The legend of Parcel 17B? Growing by the day. And Marlene? She was about to break. By now, Parcel 17B was infamous. The story had made it into not just the local paper but 2 HOA horror podcasts, a Reddit best of thread, and a suspiciously well-animated YouTube video that gave me cheekbones I absolutely do not have. Apparently, internet justice has a filter for that. And the HOA? Well, they were scrambling like ants after you move the rock. Half the board had resigned. One member, sweet, nervous Greg, posted an open letter on Facebook that basically said, "I never supported Marlene. Please don't come for my kayak." Claire stopped answering emails altogether. Rumor had it she was quietly applying for jobs in other neighborhoods. Marlene, though, still standing, still clutching her laminated bylaws like they were constitutional amendments, still convinced she could somehow spin this into a win. So when I got the formal invitation to the emergency HOA General Assembly, I knew something was up. Tuesday, 6 p.m., Pleasant Shores Clubhouse. Open to all residents. Topic: Parcel 17B and HOA Governance Review. Oh yes, I RSVP'd. And I brought snacks. Metaphorical ones. I arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat in the front row, directly across from the board's folding table like it was a televised debate. The room was packed, about 40 residents, all of them tight-lipped and tense, murmuring like something juicy was about to explode. Marlene entered last, flanked by 2 remaining board members. She looked tired, not in a "I didn't sleep" way, in a "my empire is crumbling and someone just turned the Wi-Fi off" way. She cleared her throat and launched into her speech. As many of you are aware, recent events regarding Parcel 17B have caused confusion and disorder within our community. I want to assure you. Are you paying rent yet? Someone in the back called out. Laughter. Someone fake coughed. Squatter tax. Marlene pressed on, voice tightening like a corset, that all actions taken by the board were within the bounds of our authority and intended to uphold the integrity of our neighborhood. I raised my hand. Slowly. Deliberately. She ignored it. So I stood. Since this is an open meeting, and since I was directly named in a cease and desist from your board, I said calmly, I'd like to address a few points for clarity. Marlene looked like she'd just swallowed a pine cone. But the crowd was nodding. Someone whispered, "Let her speak." So I did. I walked to the front with a folder in one hand and a smug calmness in the other. I am not, nor have I ever been, a member of this HOA, I began. The cabin on Parcel 17B was built in 1963 by my grandfather. The land around it, including the gravel trail, the trash station, and your precious kayak rack, has been privately owned by me since 2021. I opened the folder, held up the certified plat maps, the zoning docs, and, cherry on top, the registered letter I'd sent outlining the trespass and rent demand. The HOA illegally installed multiple structures on my land, and then attempted to force me to sell under threat of legal escalation. In response, I sent an invoice, legally justified, calculated fairly, and, to date, completely ignored. Marlene interrupted, her voice a little too high-pitched. You cannot just demand rent from a community. I turned. Marlene, with respect, I can. And I did. And it's already being reviewed by the county zoning board, who are very interested in how many structures you've erected without proper permits. That quieted the room. So I went in for the final twist. Also, I said, flipping to the last page, you may want to relocate the HOA trailer and storage shed. Turns out those are also on my property line. As of this week, I filed for a lien. Boom. A man near the back actually said, "Holy SH," before being elbowed by his wife. The board didn't have much to say after that. Marlene tried. Oh, how she tried to salvage something. She blamed incorrect records, legacy mapping errors, and even implied I had doctored documents. So I pulled out my final card. Funny, I said, holding up my phone. Because the HOA president from 2018, the one who helped you file the first bylaws, just emailed me a notarized statement confirming you knew that land wasn't yours. Silence. Even Claire looked up from her folded hands like, wait, what? Marlene's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She didn't speak. She just sat down, slowly, quietly, utterly defeated. The meeting ended without a vote, without a resolution, without a sound from Marlene. But I left with something better, the sound of 30 homeowners whispering to each other. She was right the whole time. 2 weeks later, a formal letter arrived, signed by the new interim HOA president. The board recognizes your claim to the property in question and confirms that all HOA structures have been removed or relocated. Additionally, we would like to formally apologize for the actions taken by the previous administration. Enclosed is a check to settle the invoice in full, including interest. There it was. Signed, sealed, cashed. Marlene stepped down for personal reasons. Claire transferred to another HOA 6 towns over. Greg started showing up to neighborhood events like a man reborn. And me? I went back to the cabin, painted the porch, repaired a few floorboards, hung up a new sign over the front steps. Private property, not HOA affiliated. Trespassers will be invoiced. Just a little souvenir. And as I sat on the dock, cold drink in hand, watching the sun drip orange over the lake, I realized I hadn't just protected my land. I'd broken their little system. The one built on fear, silence, and laminated rules. And I didn't do it with lawyers or bulldozers. I did it with a printer, a map, and a whole lot of sarcasm. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.